So our session really now is on community music in the 21st century. And it's coming off the back of, it's coming off the back of a wonderful, incredible 2-day seminar from the first ever 2-day seminar of the Asian Pacific Community Music Network, which was organised by Brydie-Leigh Bartleet over here, and it was extraordinary. I mean, you know Brydie, yeah, I heard somebody starting the class. Go on, it's good. It's an extraordinary class. So, to some extent, this session will refer to that and build on from that. But I think if people want to know more about that network, which is an ongoing network, which is meeting again in Japan in July 2015, and people may want to be involved in that, then please, they would see some people up here, and certainly in the three of you, I imagine, yeah. After this session, that would be the time to talk about that, because we're going to build on beyond that, because we also have some speakers as well who weren't at that, and who were delighted to welcome Sui Bang as well here, and of course Eugene, Skeef, who was able to attend some of the session, but not all, so there'll be a diversity here. Now, as I said, it's titled Community Music in the 21st Century, so as part of the kind of introductions to the whole thing, I should get that out of the way. I've run an awful lot, or been involved in, and been on panels of an awful lot of things called community music. And we tend to run this very rich and diverse and intriguing and in-depth session, and it goes great, and we're all flying, and we're ready to go home, you know. We're in the last few minutes, and then a little hand goes up in the back and says, "Excuse me, what is community music, by the way, anyway?" You know, so that tends to happen just at the very end. So I thought I'd head that off at the pass by saying I don't know what community music is. I don't think even Dave Price, who knows all things to all people, but I don't think even Dave Price knows what it is anymore, because it's changing. It's changing, it's in the 21st century, it's moving, it's changing, it's shifting. And not only is it moving and changing and shifting, but it's different here than it is there. And it's different there than it is somewhere else. So it's a different thing in lots of places. Lots of people see, and I can understand that, and it's very valid, see community music as very related to indigenous music making, and also the regeneration of folk traditions and folk heritage. I understand that completely. Other people see community music as amateur music making, when people get together to just spontaneously to play things. That's fine. Other people see community music around the areas of outreach and engagement with communities and those type of issues, and talk about that. And then other people talk about this interventionist model of community music. Music as a tool for social and personal change. So there's a whole range of different ways you can position yourself in this, and we're not trying to close the circle here. Yeah, we're just trying to welcome everybody into it. So that's what we'll be doing. And I think it'll be very clear from the diversity of what the panel is saying that is the case. We're going to start off now. I think we are. Cool. We're going to start off, and we're a bit excited, really, because every single time, and you've seen him before, yeah? You've all seen him by now, and you know what he's like, and it's great. Every single time, you get the hearts going like this, you know? And you get this little change. Everybody here, by this stage, has fallen in love with you. Oh. Yeah, it's not right. You've fallen in love with Eugene. Let me know if that's true. Let's hear you.
You're such a charmer.
It's true. No, it's true. I've been in love with you. I've been in love with you a long time. That's a different story, but everybody's fallen in love with Eugene, and Eugene's kicking us off, and we know that's going to be amazing. Eugene's the artistic director of Umoya Creations, and his title of his presentation is "I Am Because You Are." Thank you, Eugene. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not buying drinks though this evening. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I just want to explain the circumstance of my being right now. I'm sweaty because I've been on a panel with young people about how they engage with music, and the age range was supposed to be 18 to 30, and so I had to lie about my age, not verbally, but just by pretending to be youthful, and I'm paying for it now. But thank you, thanks, Phil. Just a small bit of background to where I'm coming from in terms of how I approach this thing called community music. Is it in capital letters now, or small, or doesn't matter? Yeah. But my whole life's experience from South Africa, and until I was forced to flee, and all the years I've lived in England and traveled around the world till now, has been about community music, in my understanding of it. and that is music within the community, where music played a very powerful role in bringing people together, but also in creating a refuge, a safe haven for people who were victims of all the violence that was happening, that was a direct consequence of the apartheid regime. So I grew up in those years, and that's how I met Steve Biko, with whom we did that kind of work. But my home presented that model for me, in that it was the place where everybody who was running away from the terrible effects of the violence would come. And there'd be food and music and political conversation and poetry and dance and what have you. So that has formed the way I work. And I guess I took that with me, and yeah, and just carried on like that. The title, how I came about the title of I Am Because You Are, I borrowed that from the humanistic ethos or philosophy or outlook, worldview that Nelson Mandela is famous for. He didn't invent it, nor did Archbishop Desmond Tutu, but that's the ethos behind the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And in Zulu, it says, Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. And I'm indelibly marked, stained with that outlook. And that loosely translates as, I am because you are. I believe that when we talk about, when we say community music, we are talking about music being able to make people feel more of who they are, to feel good within themselves. That's my outlook. And I know, like Phil was saying, there are different ways of seeing that, but as far as I'm concerned, that's, you know, the way. So whether I'm in a prison working with, you know, lifers, you know, at Wormwood Scrubs, or working with the London Philharmonic Orchestra players, or working with children in Peckham in London, or Soweto in South Africa, pickpockets on the beaches with prostitutes in Durban, or the so-called street kids in Sudan, it's the same energy that permeates that work, if you know what I'm saying. I don't have to adjust myself. I don't change anything about myself. I go in there knowing that I'm going to use music to feel whole within myself, but in relation to the other people, and hopefully to generate a sense of wholeness within themselves as well. And that really is all I have to say, you know, because it's as simple as that, you know. I am because you are.
Eugene, thank you very, very much. Thank you. And I think what we'll do is we'll take questions and comments after everybody's spoken, if that's okay with everyone, and run it that way. I have to apologize to Bridie, because you did ask me, and I said I would, and I haven't done, encourage people, you know, to come closer if you can, you know. So we'll let that happen if you want to do that, because, you know, it'd be better, really, wouldn't it? Should we stare them out? Do you want to give them, like...
We should point to the people that we want to move.
We should... my hands up, I'll stop myself. But, yeah, or at least here's another thing you could do. You don't have to do that, but just let us feel the warmth, you know what I mean? That'd be nice, if you could just exude more for us and make it... There was a few upstairs, yeah. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Look, this is all good stuff. This is all good stuff. Let's build that feeling here. Now, thank you very much for that. I know most of the panel from before, but what's brilliant about these conferences really is when you meet somebody. I use the phrase when you meet another hero, you know. When you meet somebody who's transforming other people's lives, and you think, well, this is transforming my life, knowing about what you're actually doing. And that happened to me this morning in the session on music and conflict, in areas of conflict and resolution. When I first heard Tan Sui Bing speak, because her work is perfect community music activism. It's just lovely with kids in Penang. It was an extraordinary project, looking at diversity and difference in religion, looking at different cultural traditions, but looking at it very much about understanding the other and understanding yourself, and being able to have that dialogue and to develop that dialogue through art and give it back to the community. It was extraordinary. You're doing extraordinary work, if I may say. And I'll just introduce you now, if I may. Sui Bing is Professor of Ethnomusicology at the School of the Arts, University Saints Malaysia, and she works with communities and young people in Penang, trying to revitalize traditions as well as inter-ethnic peace building. So please, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, this morning I talked about my own project in Penang, but for now I would like to talk about community engagement and participatory processes that we are engaged in when we work with communities, which will lead towards sustainability. The conservation of traditions, including music, in many places in the third world often intersect with the struggle for basic rights such as indigenous identity, health, education, housing, land, gender issues, peace, and so on and so forth in the communities. So what I would like to highlight is that for many community projects in Asia, it has been proven that participatory ways of working are more effective than top-down methods. Participatory activities, training, research, using local knowledge, facilitate communities to identify their own needs. Participation creates community confidence, ownership of the activities, which finally will lead to pilot projects being transformed into sustainable and long-term initiatives that are finally taken over by the communities themselves. So I have been going around Asia trying to learn from many community groups, and I would like to share with you some of these participatory methods that have been used by some groups in Japan, Indonesia, Philippines, and then my own work. So for example, can I have the, I just have some pictures to show you so that you have some context here to what I'm talking about. In Okinawa, in the Heibaru Museum, just move, the Heibaru Museum has projects which raises awareness about the effects of war and immigration on the lives and identities of the local communities. And these projects involve young people in Heibaru to collect and document oral histories from the older generation who lived through and suffered the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. So by doing, they learn about the effects of war through documentation, through creating artworks, video, music, and so on and so forth. And each family in Okinawa has someone who has died in a war. So in this process of collecting oral data and oral documentation, the whole community is involved in telling their stories about how they have suffered, and the whole community is engaged in the process of education and advocacy for peace. Can you just run the, just run the pictures here. The pictures are just to tell you a bit about some of the projects that are being carried out by the young people. And the young people have been trained in oral history collection and also to use different media, but they conduct their own research. Yeah, so this is a young woman who drew the sketch about his grandfather's experiences. Okay, the second example, just move on. This is, they are making a video. Just continue. Yeah, in the second example, Bahay Tuluyan, a non-profit organization working with children in need of special protection in the Philippines, they have used theater, participatory theater and arts to help children who have dropped out of school, who are sexually abused, who have been trafficked, or children who live in the streets, to tell their own stories and try to find solutions to their problems. So, yeah, just continue. Yeah, so these children, they are given training in the performing arts, in music, in singing, and so on. And then they create stories based on issues that concern them, such as child abduction, trafficking, teenage pregnancy, drugs, and so on and so forth. Then there is a discussion after the performance. They will perform for the other children in the community, and there's a discussion about the issues that they have raised. Okay, and the third example that I would like to talk about is Jogja. It's in Jogja, Indonesia. Yeah. Kampung Halaman, a community non-profit organization which promotes the use of audiovisual media in, to encourage youths to speak out about the concerns of their community. Kampung Halaman has chosen to use film and video as media for communication. They undertake projects in the community, and one of the communities is the prisoners, teenage prisoners. Yeah, so they use video and they interview each other so that they can talk about the problems that they face in the prison. Yeah, and there is another project about teenage girls being married off at the age of 13. So these girls, they interview each other, they interview the parents, they interview the men, and and they make their own video. So as a result, that they show the video to the community, and then there's a discussion about it. Yeah. Okay, and so this is my own project, which I've done in Penang. Just move on. When we heard about the market, this is Campbell Street Market, when we heard that it was going to be closed down, the children went to interview the traders. Yeah? This is the heritage market, the wet market in Penang. And then they got the stories from the traders, and they came back and created their own little play with music. Yeah. Regarding this. So we just finished the story. Yeah, so they collected materials from the environment and created their own music, yeah, based on the stories told to them by the traders. Just finish up. Yeah, and then there was skill training. Just finish up, yeah, quickly. Yeah, and they performed for the community, again using the materials that they collected. And if you see on the left, many of the shops have been closed down because they cannot afford to pay high rentals. So as a result of the show, the residents were able to voice their grievances, yeah, regarding having to move out of the area. So just to end, for any cultural project to be sustainable, communities must be empowered and gain confidence to take action in order to make changes in their lives. There is also a need to democratize research and promote collaboration between the researcher and the community so that the latter is engaged and feels a sense of ownership in the whole process for change. Finally, for engagement and ownership to occur, participatory approaches for planning and training, research, mapping of issues, analysis, presentation, drawn from ethnomusicology and other disciplines need to be used. Critical evaluation at the end will help to enhance engagement and empowerment. And local forms of communication, art forms, languages, and knowledge should be improved. So for people like me and other researchers who are outsiders, there's just, we need to let the communities plan their own methodologies and decide what they want to do. Because if we want the project to be sustainable, they have to make the decisions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Swinburne. Thank you very much. And we have plenty of time to talk at the end of this session, so I'm sure lots of comments and questions and issues raised by that presentation. Thank you very, very much. We're going to move on. We're going to move on. A great friend of mine and a great friend of, I think, probably everybody in the room here is Gillian Howell, and Gillian's been a big presence at this conference, as you all know. So Gillian works with the Queensland Conservatorium, Griffith University, and is a lecturer in community music leadership in the Northern Melbourne Institute of TAFE. TAFE, I'm sorry. TAFE. It's one of those kind of things. Yeah. So, sure, lost cultural issues, you know, lost in translation there, you know. Sorry about that. And I'm looking forward to this. You're introducing your own topic yourself, are you?
I will.
You will? Great. Please, for Gillian, please, if you will. Thank you very much.
I think we should adopt formally TAFE as a way of pronouncing TAFE. It's great, TAFE. It's quite European. I come from Melbourne, the state of Victoria, so for those of you who aren't from Australia, it's down in the south. And what I wanted to speak about today was an issue that I think, or a question that I have about the future of community music, however we're defining that, in the state of Victoria. So just to set the scene for you, I think one of the things that really the state of Victoria can be really proud of is an extraordinary network of community singing groups. These have been largely supported by an organisation called Community Music Victoria that has been running on a minuscule budget for decades now, and works to support support music initiatives at a community level, also to advocate for them at a government level, to provide resources and access to resources, and also training opportunities and networking opportunities for members of those groups. And so to sing in a community choir in the state of Victoria is something that is probably not an unusual occurrence. It's not unusual to meet somebody, particularly people of a certain age group, who would be members of a choir somewhere. And it's not confined to the inner city. There's been a lot of the work has really developed in rural areas of the state, so that there are an extraordinary number, given the size of the population. We in Australia, we like per capita statistics. But given the size of the population, we have a really large number of community singing choirs, community singing groups. Some of these are very informal gatherings that take place maybe once a month or even less frequently. Others are groups that meet every week, that give performances, that make CDs, that go on tours, and are, really active. And this creates a very vibrant community music scene in Victoria. And that's also supported by festivals where people go along and take part in workshops and really engage with their own musical development and sense of themselves as music participants. So it's really healthy. One of the things that Community Music Victoria do, and that has been a major factor in the development of these networks, has it been to encourage and nurture community-based music leaders. So they've offered training programs, which often start with a sort of a weekend workshop, or even perhaps shorter, or perhaps a longer commitment, for people who have identified for themselves a sense that singing together is important in their community, and are interested in finding out whether they would be someone who could be a music leader. So these are people who may have another day job. They're not professional musicians, they're not full-time musicians, but they have a love of singing and a belief in the importance of singing in communities, and undertake leadership training, so that now Victoria has a really amazing network of community music singing leaders. Okay, so which is great. We also, across the whole country, we train a large number of musicians every year. Now, many of these musicians will go on to teach music and work as music educators. A small number of them, particularly in the classical music field, may go on to win a job in an orchestra, but we're quite a small country, so we only have a certain number of orchestras that can be sustained in a single nation. And the way that orchestras are structured here is that if you win a job and you pass your trial, then you've got the job for life. So to win a job in an orchestra, you have to wait for a space to open up, and that can take a long time, decades, with some instruments. So we have an awful lot of really skilled musicians, not necessarily with a large range of career options. And one of the things that is talked about a lot in music training these days is about the portfolio career. However, within that portfolio career model, we don't necessarily have conservatoires or other Bachelor of Music offering places in the country, offering the musicians the opportunity to develop the flexible musicianship skills that you might use to be a community music leader in some of the other models of community music making. So when I think about these other models, I'm thinking about the intervention model. This is so-called, or so named by Lee Higgins, a great friend of ours on this panel, and many of yours as well, I'm sure, who has written about community music in theory and practice, and has defined one mode of practice to be the model where a skilled music leader works with a group of participants towards a musical outcome, but quite often with extra musical intentions or goals to do with health, well-being, social connection, and other goals that we know are achievable through music making. So my, I guess, question or tension that I see here is we have a population that is already engaged in music making. We have the potential for building up the portfolio careers of young musicians by offering a broader approach to musicianship skills that gives them flexibility to work with more diverse groups than simply people who already know how to play their instruments. It's what we offer right now. There's courses in conducting ensembles and so on, but there's an assumption that the ensemble already knows how to read music, already can play music. The kind of work that I do, I trained for in the UK 20 years ago, and I would work in this intervention model. I would see that this is a really rich and satisfying way to work in music, and it's very flexible within schools, within community settings, within hospitals, within prisons, all sorts of interesting areas that place a musician and their musicianship skills in a really interesting arena in terms of their creativity and in terms of musical responses. So I see that there's a gap here, but also a question about professionalisation. There's something really wonderful about the idea of community-based leaders and communities generating their own music leaders. There's also something really powerful about a person with the sorts of skills that you develop when you undertake high-level musical training, returning into community settings to apply those skills in a wide variety of creative and responsive ways. I see that we have a gap, if you like, in the training that's available to young musicians. Hopefully that's something that is going to change in the future, but we're here to talk about community music in the 21st century. So I think that that is something that it has not yet been addressed, and if it's in the planning, it's being kept pretty quiet at the moment. But I also want to, a question that comes up fairly regularly in community music fields of debate is about professionalisation. Community music in part exists to challenge the idea of institutions, to challenge the ideas of hierarchy, to challenge the ideas that within music, music works in such a way that it is only for some, it's only for the talented. Community music is saying no to all of that and saying music is for everybody, and community musicians engage people in making music regardless of the skills that they bring to the table in the first place. We work with the raw materials as they are. I'm not proposing answers to this right now, although probably where I sit it's quite clear, but I think it's an interesting thing for us to have in mind that when we talk about community music, we can talk about training, but that training and professionalisation of a field of activity can look very different, and depending on your viewpoint, you're going to endorse perhaps one style, one approach to training over the other. For myself, working in this environment, I very rarely would call myself a community musician in Australia. Partly because Bridie and I joked about this one time where we said, community musician in Australia, it could be a bit like saying, I love what I do, but you don't really need to pay me for it. And we don't want that. But at the same time, we don't want to create barriers between those who do love what they do and aren't worried about getting paid for it because they do it for the love of it. So I'm raising this one as my question, and for thinking about community music in this region in the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Please, thank you. How are you going, folks? It was worth. You're glad? Are you glad you came in? Yeah, aren't you? Thank you. That was the answer. There wasn't two answers to that, You've spoken for the group. It's incredibly stimulating session we're having so far, and we're I'm actually putting you on a warning now. I know there's a couple of people have to go, or in other words sneaking out, but that's all right. But the rest of you here, you're going to be working in the second half of the session because we want your responses to these wonderful presentations in the second half of the session. But for now, we're going to move on with two more wonderful presentations coming up now. First of all, I'm delighted this week again meeting new people. I met Jennifer Cattermole this week at the Asian Pacific Community Music Seminar, and we'd never met before, and yet another activist another person involved in our whole journey. Jennifer is a lecturer in music at the University of Otago and has been involved for a number of years with community choirs and also with the University of Otago Gamelan Community Ensemble. She currently facilitates 2 community music groups, and they're 2 quite different groups. One is a ukulele orchestra, and the other is a Taongo Puoro traditional Maori music group. So some amazing stuff going on there. So and I believe you're talking about reflective practice.
That's right.
Thank you. So please, for Jennifer, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil. And sorry, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. And thank you very much for the privilege of being asked to come and talk to you today. I probably, in terms of my professional identity, I have to say that until as a few days ago, I probably would have thought of myself more as an ethnomusicologist. But in terms of my interests and my passions, I've always been absolutely passionate about community music and the power that it has. As Phil mentioned, I've been involved with community choirs for a number of years. I've been also involved with the Gamelan Orchestra, and my PhD research looked at a particular form of community music making in Fiji, which is an incredible form of vernacular music making known as singing. Comes from the English term singing. So if you can picture,
Wow.
yeah, so if you can picture groups, family, friends getting together in the evenings, sitting underneath the verandas or roofs of their houses with a bowl of yangona or kava. Any of you try kava? A few? Okay, you know what I'm talking about then. And they get together to drink, joke, laugh, share stories, talk, and of course play music. So guitar, ukulele-based music that they perform at these occasions. So as I've sort of said, these things have given me a really powerful appreciation of the value of community music making. And this is something that I've since, I think, taken on board and engaged in my own practice. So within sort of the last year and a half, I've been responsible for facilitating 2 community music groups at the University of Otago. So one of these, as Phil mentioned, is the Ukulele Orchestra, which we call ourselves the Uni-Ukes. And the second of these is a taonga or traditional Māori musical instrument group. So how did I get interested in these? Well, I guess the Ukulele Orchestra came out of really my experiences in Fiji, where I sort of learnt to play ukulele, and also coming back to New Zealand and discovering this incredible groundswell of support for ukulele as in schools through programs like Play It Strange program that's active in New Zealand. And of course this is not unique to New Zealand by any means, it's very much a global phenomenon. Ukulele is of course a very accessible instrument, it's very quick, you can quickly pick up and learn it. It's very portable of course as well, so it's in that sense it's a much more accessible instrument than the piano, for example, just from the pure sense of portability of the instrument. The Taonga Poro group really grew out of 2 key interests of mine. One of these is of course music. Music is essential to who I am and what I believe in. And the other was really an interest that arose out of carving. So Māori carving practices and significance of that. So with both groups, it was a matter of putting out the call, you could say. So advertising that, advertising for people to come along if they were interested. So it's kind of, they're both my brainchild in a way, but it's very much based on, there needed to be a community of interest for them to exist, obviously. So I've been asked to talk about reflective practice here today, and obviously, and this is a point that was raised earlier as well, and I think that I mean, reflection is really critical to any kind of professional practice. You know, I engage in this in my teaching, and I apply it very much in these situations too. So not only, of course, reflecting on practice as a practitioner or a facilitator of these groups, but I find that group feedback is also essential. So remaining really responsive to the needs and the desires of that group is, I think, critical to the group's sustainability, so picking up on previous points as well. And I try and remain as kind of flexible and as inclusive as I possibly can to respond to issues that are raised by the group as they arise. We always have feedback sessions. I mean, when I set up the groups initially, we sat down, we had a meeting, and we went through things like who's going to teach, how are they going to teach, who decides repertoire, you know, how's the situation going to be managed? What do people want to get out of the group? What are the kind of core values that we want to base this particular group or this community around? And it's an ongoing process of reflection and development. So usually at the end of every semester we have a feedback session where the group members can get together, you know, either chat amongst themselves. I usually leave the room at that point, just, you know, no pressure. So leave the room, leave them to chat among themselves and, you know, write down feedback and put it in a box. Or quite often people will just come up to me and you know, comment on things that they care about. There's a lot of, you know, the feedback's always mixed, so there's some really positive feedback, and there's always things that that group members feel could perhaps be managed slightly differently. So it's a matter of really listening to the group and trying as best you can to accommodate what their needs and wants are. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you very, very much, Jennifer. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, it's a strange old situation I'm in this thing, because I actually don't know what to do next, because I don't know how much I have a lot in front of me here of stuff to read, because it's a very rich life you've led already. But it's a lot of stuff, and then I want to say all that about Bridie, but the other thing I want to say about Bridie really is we were in this session, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get everybody going now, but we were in this session in Rome in 2008 with the late Steve Dillon was there, and he was really charging us all up. For those of you who know him, he was a force, you know. Force is still here, spirit is still here. But it was this session where we were getting very passionate about people's rights to have access to music making, you know, and Bridie just took the room it was like one of these electrical storms you have here in this place. I never saw an energy like it. It was fantastic. And from that moment I knew that this region of the world, this Asian Pacific region of the world, was going to develop some special things in community music. And we saw that over the 2 days here. So I'll just say briefly, Dr. Brydie-Leigh Bartleet is Senior Lecturer at the Queensland Conservatorium, Griffith University, Deputy Director of Queensland Conservatorium Research Centre, Convener of the Music and Community Strand, Convener of the Bachelor of Music Honours Programme, and it goes on. It goes on, it goes on. It's an amazing career. So please, if you will, Dr. Brydie-Leigh Bartleet, thank you very much.
Electrical storm, my husband might agree, but it's a different context. How are you doing? Are you... Oh,
that didn't go. Well, let's try that again. How are you doing? Yes.
How are you doing? Are you okay? I have this urge to climb up on top of the table and disrupt this kind of highly formalised setting here, but I'm going to be a good girl and I'm going to behave myself and I'm just going to stay put. But as is customary here in Australia, I wanted to begin, before I say anything, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we are having this panel here now, and the World Forum, and to pay my respects to elders both past and present, to extend that respect to Auntie Anne Leisha, who you saw do the welcome last night, a very, very dear friend, and she calls me family, who I've learnt tremendous amounts from, all the elders who I've worked with around the country. and I'm not going to say elders because I'll probably get in trouble, but beautifully experienced community music people here. Dave Price got the joke. I'm looking out in the audience and I see some faces of people who have really shaped the field and really influenced many of us in how we think about community music. So I also pay my respects to you, and I'm looking at cohorts of them already. If you don't know me, as Phil mentioned, I'm lucky to be on staff here. Normally I'm teaching in this room with this entire room full of first-year students, and I call it the Colosseum, so you're much more well-behaved than they are. And I guess I'm a practitioner and a scholar when it comes to community music. As Phil mentioned, I was very, very honoured to convene the first ever Asia Pacific Community Music Network just the last couple of days, and that's just been the most rewarding and enriching experience. But I'm also very privileged to be part of the Community Music Activities Commission of ISMAI, where I've really learnt a lot, and I'm going to maybe refer to some ideas that have come from that forum and what I have to say. So I guess what I'm doing here is I'm zooming in to tell you about who I am before I zoom out, so that you can sort of position what I have to say, knowing a little bit about who I am. Like many of you, how many of you would describe yourselves as somebody involved in community music? Most?
We got them in the room now. Yeah.
So we're amongst friends here. So like all of you, probably I grew up in community music in South Africa. We realised we're from the same part. Also in Sydney, also in regional areas here. We moved around a lot, up in Rockhampton and in Gosford. And then after training here as a conductor, went out and started working with community groups. And found out very, very quickly that that was my home. And it was because people and music were hand in hand. One didn't trump the other. And learnt some very, very important lessons that I'm sure many of you would relate to about the importance of people in those contexts. And like I'm sure all of you could, I have hundreds of stories of those beautiful lessons, and one that just always sticks at the top of my mind is the story about Brian. Now Brian played in a community band that I was conducting, and we were going on tour to Taiwan. And of course Brian conducted other community groups, and he was a trumpet player, so he never gave me any trouble like the rest of the male trumpet players, because he knew what it was like to stand up on that podium. And we toured together, and of course more and more came out about Brian's life, and he'd separated from his wife, and there are amazing stories there, but watching him flourish on this tour was incredible. He just was mobbed by everyone where he performed. Got a bit disturbing at times, but we went with it. And I'll never forget the day when I came home and I got a phone call from another band member, and they said Brian has just died. And I'll never forget that chilly morning sitting in the church, surrounded by hundreds, literally hundreds of community band musicians, all in their uniforms with their instruments. And on that coffin was his flugelhorn. And he was a tradesman, wasn't he? He was a tradesman. And I sat there thinking to myself, wow, a life defined by music. This is the epitome of community music. And I was devastated and heartbroken, and I cried with everybody else. And it was a very important lesson for me there about the importance of people in music making, and I think that really is what is at the heart of community music making for me. And that's become more and more apparent in the context that I'm now working. I've kind of left the banding scene and now work primarily with Aboriginal communities in remote parts of Australia in intercultural collaborative projects. Primarily in the pop music realm. And in my research, I've also been starting to, we're running big projects that look at community music programs in prisons, community music programs for at-risk youth, community music programs for asylum seekers. So I guess you could say starting to really work in this realm of what we might call marginalised communities, silenced communities, communities that haven't customarily had a voice. So that's very, very much what's informing my thinking now, and I wanted to just say a few words about my observations of the field of community music, if you could call that, because that's what it said in the blurb, and I read the blurb and thought I should talk to it. And I thought I might focus on the CMA, the Community Music Activities Commission of ISMAI, not because I think that's necessarily representative of everything in community music, but it's kind of like a touchstone. It's kind of like a focus point for me now, and I think is probably one of the most recognised international bodies for community music. And I've been going since Rome, so across the last 6 or 7 years, and I've noticed a really, really big change that I think might be indicative of something much more broad. When I went in Rome, it was really nice and comfortable. It was really safe. There was a lot of discussion about community music practice, and we all seemed to be on the same page. It was this interventionist model, very much about equal participation, very driven by this UK-defined way of thinking about community music. And if people didn't quite get it, they were kind of taken under the wings and it was explained, this is what it is. And we had a lady from Germany who said, we don't call it this in Germany, and this was like a revelation and it was exciting. And then we figured out that everything she was talking about, we would probably call community music. And it was very civil and lovely. And then we went and had our next commission in China. And just by being in China in that cultural context, something shifted and changed. The whole setting changed, but also these sort of taken for granted ways of doing community music became problematized. And I'll never forget the moment we went on an excursion. We went out on Westlake, this beautiful honeymooners place, and all of us who had couples, at home were feeling very, sad and all of this. Anyway, there was this Chinese delegate who came up to me and started talking to me, and he brought a translator with him. And he said to me, do community and society mean the same thing in your culture? So I thought, well, this is not going to be a leisurely trip for me. How am I going to start engaging with this conversation through a translator? And so I fumbled and started to think about it. But I started to talk about the way that it's always contextual. It's a culturally specific thing. And after that little moment, it really dawned on me that this concept of community is always contested, it's always contextual, and it's always up for grabs and shifting and changing. And I think that seminar, in that cultural context, things started to shift. Then we got to Greece, Corfu.
It's really tough life.
It's a tough life. And these really interesting pushes and pulls became palpable, so much so that people ended up in tears. This doesn't normally happen. Normally we're hugging and embracing everyone.
I was facilitating the group. It was in
Gillian's
tears.
fault. She was facilitating a group that wound up in tears, but she wasn't the only one, because we had a contingent of delegates from the Middle East, and I also found myself facilitating the concluding session where it could have wound up in a young guy punching an older lady, because we had Israeli and Palestinian delegates there in the same session talking. And so different cultural contexts, thinking about conflict zones where it was very heated, things started to really come and bubble up. And there were also all sorts of questions around practice and research, and I started to really see some significant changes in that commission, which I think are potentially representative of broader agendas, and people really starting to grapple with bigger issues about human rights, about conflict zones, about health, about social justice, about the environment. And we've seen those sorts of discussions happening at the Asia Pacific Community Music Network seminar that we've just talked about. And I think by virtue of the context that community musicians are working in and the ways that they're working, they're really opening their hearts up to these broader and bigger agendas. And I'm not saying that people who wouldn't describe themselves as community musicians don't think about these things, but there's something inherent in the ways that community musicians are operating that opens themselves up to connecting with these broader agendas that basically every one of these panellists have talked about it today. And I think that's worth celebrating and thinking about in terms of how this field is coming of age in the 21st century.
Cool. Good stuff. Now, we want to leave the rest of the session quite open. We want people to give their best effort to move the whole, and much respect to you all, by the way. We look forward to the next time. It's been historic every time we've met. Yeah, take care. Cool. I mean that genuinely, in fact. That man who's gone out started the first ISME Commission on Community Music Activity, just for the record. He's a wonderful We want to leave this session open and hard-working. We don't want to tie it down too much. We want it the space. It's not that open. The lighting on us, by the way, we all feel we're in the police barracks now at this point with the lighting, don't we? But we want to keep the flow going. So we're open for questions. The lighting change would be kind of good if we could. It's a little intrusive on us here. But the main thing we want to do is get some questions and some contributions and some discussion, and we can have heated argument if needs be. That's okay. But we'd like maybe if you want to respond to some of the, perhaps not that way, but if you want to respond to some of the issues, we'll take some questions and comments. If you do it by hands, or at least some kind of indication, we can call on you there, and we'll take it out to the panel. Please, there, go on. So yeah.
Being a Pacific person in New Zealand usually means you're committed to not only your extended family, which can be quite large in New Zealand and in the islands, but you also have church commitments, community leadership commitments, etc. And you're also probably working at least one, if not two or more jobs to take care of your family. These are the kind of individuals that are teaching traditional Pacific musics and dance for this festival for thousands of young Pacific secondary school students, and I also know of individuals doing that who are leading community projects such as teaching Cook Islands drumming in prisons for men who are about to be rejoining society, and who are teaching in their churches or going into community halls and teaching Samoan fire knife dancing to young Samoan boys and things like this. And what has struck me is they all speak about the long hours, and we sort of idealize this idea, I think, sometimes of this labor of love with community music. And I think for someone like myself, who's an individual, doesn't have a lot of family responsibilities and things like that, I can heed that noble calling of giving my time. But I'm wondering if others would like to comment on how can we support community music with populations who don't necessarily, they don't have the advantages of the kind of professional jobs and salaries that some of us have, yet without their efforts, there cannot be sustainability of these forms of music and music transmission.
No, I'm not necessarily answering. I've got a further question. What does the community, what sort of needs do they have when you talk about how can we support them? What do they feel they need in terms of support?
I think just in terms of finances, I think when we talk about the kind of financial structure or making financial the kind of financial opportunities that may be available to them and this kind of thing, because it comes down to, I know with my communities it's almost coming down to people's health and well-being are actually being compromised because they're so overburdened with other responsibilities and are completely unpaid for this kind of work that they're doing. Unless there's some kind of community offering or something like that. And I should also add that the festival is very much tied into the Ministry of Education, and there's not, any financial kind of compensation coming from them either. So I think that it's just something that I'd be interested if anyone else works with communities like that where there's a financial.
Okay, it seems I've got that one. I'm going to come back to it first, and then we'll come to you in a moment. There's a lot of agencies would pay for the type of outcomes that community musicians can achieve. And those agencies exist in most of those countries. Maybe not them all, but most of those countries. They exist in many countries in the region. Sui Beng, you'd be well aware of that. Health Yeah, we'll pay. Yeah, there will be something about criminal justice. Yeah, in some places, and there's a whole range of different agencies. But often the person doesn't know that they're doing that job, doesn't know that doesn't know that that job exists. And I would like to see people within this room and people engaged with higher education taking that role on of mentoring people to let them know that they can create this type of work within Ireland, which is a small country. It is a European country. There is money there, there's no doubt. But that job really didn't exist until Dave was involved with developing a program there. And since then, there's been about 200 people have got careers out of it. It can be developed, but it'll take a decade. Did anybody else here? Yeah, please. I'll just speak like that.
It's a great point to raise. You know, how we take care of these community music facilitators who give and give and give and give and give for not only very little financial reward, but sometimes that we all know what that feeling's like, get totally exhausted, and who's actually looking after their well-being and welfare. So I don't necessarily have the answer. Of course, we can talk about funding strategies, support from local councils. I've also tried to work collaboratively as well, sharing, you know, projects and gigs with a group of people rather than being the sole facilitator. And there's been a lot of nourishment and support that's come from those sorts of peer groups where you're not running the whole show on your own, which has certainly helped in many respects. But I think it's a great issue to raise. Actually, I had a random person phone me up and ask if they could do a PhD on that topic. It wasn't you, was it?
No, it wasn't. I just think sometimes in what we do in communities, sometimes money is the dirty word, you know, and I think it is important to talk about money, especially for those who need it more than others, because we all know that some community music facilitators are, you know, everyone's in different financial situations, but I don't think it should be something that we leave as kind of a taboo subject to talk. We should talk about finances and the financial needs that people have.
I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I'm going to come to Eugene first, just if that's okay.
I just very briefly want to respond to that. I was struggling to just remain silent about it, but I can't help it. I was brief in my introduction, but my entire life, if I was to put my life on a scale, the scale tips heavily on the side of no remuneration, if that makes sense. And the side of remuneration for doing what I do, we have a debate going on with Phil. And Phil disagrees with me. He loves me, he says, but he predicates it by saying he disagrees with me because, you know, he has students, for instance, maybe for he and I it's okay, but money talks, you know. I live in London, a very expensive city. I'm a very poor person, and I'm not apologetic in saying it, you know. I'm glad to have been brought here, but my life, my daily life, and I'm not very young anymore. I told you I grew up in South Africa. It was only when I got to England where I just, you know, minimally started getting paid for doing what I do. So for me, music is as serious as your life. You know, the making of music is and I'm a facilitator. I work everywhere in every kind of situations. Bosnia, Sudan, in the toughest places, you know, in simple places. But I'm not saying that we don't need to be paid, but I'm just wondering if there's a sense in which when we work the way that I believe I work, some of the answers come from that as well. You know, that community music has inherent in it the kind of resilience and wisdom building where we can find solutions, where we don't rely on external forces. Sorry, I hope I'm making sense.
Thank you, please.
Thank you. Listening to this panel, there is a saying that comes to my mind about a participant in a high-level convention who said, "Before I came here, I was confused. Having been here, I'm still confused, but at a higher level." I wouldn't apply that verbally to my situation here, but I'm a little bit confused. I'm an economist. I was a functionary in the federal government in Switzerland. Had my own business as a consultant and personal coach, career coach. And at the same time, I was a musician, and I'm still a musician. I'm a fundamentally, basically convinced amateur musician and play the French horn. You never know what you do in, what comes out with the French horn.
Complex system.
I'm a member of an orchestra, an amateur orchestra, community music making. I was the chairman of that orchestra association. I'm still on the board. I was in the Federal Association of Orchestras. I'm now the president of the European Orchestra Federation, which is the group of all amateur orchestras in Europe, which is the classical style symphonic orchestra. Not the brass bands, not the harmony orchestras. They have their own associations, as you know. Now, what do I perceive and conceive as being community music making? It is when a couple of people get together and start to sing, period. They don't need a huge framework and whatever in the background. They decide, we want to do it, and we do it. In the village where I live, 2,500 people, there are 2 harmony music groups, 3 choirs, and they all do, every week, their rehearsals. They do concerts, they perform, and they like what they do. That's it. You see, in that situation, the term facilitator is something I cannot really see what it is supposed to do. Because in the area where I live, which is, let's say, 15 kilometers wide, long and 5 wide because we are on the border to Austria, we have about 10 choirs, each per 1 or 2 per village. Certainly in each village, a brass band or a harmony music. We have that orchestra where I play, which is a regional orchestra. So people come from 30 kilometers away, once a week, rehearse. We give 3 project concerts per year, and 1 additional in a special circumstance. This 5 weeks ago, we had a concert with our symphonic orchestra with a rock band together. Now that brought us new public, new audience. This is audience building. Now we do it. We do it ourselves.
Super.
You see, I'm not really very much in favor of formalizing things that do work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're going to stay with we'll stay with your group today. We'll come back to the panel in a while, but we're going to go to Dave Price first, and then to Deborah, and then other people. Give me an indication when you want to come in. Dave, it's over to you. Yeah.
Well, it just seems to me that it's not an either or. And if we look at the way the music industry, we're not the only people who have this discussion about whether you should get paid or not. The collapse of the music industry hasn't meant that people stopped making music. And a lot of us started off in rock bands, and we didn't do that because we wanted to be rich and famous. We did it because we loved the music. But I do think there's a case for both, really. I was in Shanghai last week, and I saw the most incredible community music making, which was just spontaneous. People did it for themselves. There didn't appear to be anybody getting paid. But I did wonder if you went back in 10 years' time, whether that would still be happening.
That's right.
And so I think, there often is an inevitable process when the longer something's been around and the greater the desire of the participants to get better, there is often emerges some kind of monetization of the activity. And I don't think it's bad, but I agree with Eugene that I think what it can lead to is a kind of dangerous, what's the opposite of sustainability?
Unsustainability.
Yeah. So I think it's what we've seen in the UK is that you know, now that we're living in an age of austerity, a lot of that activity has disappeared. And that's a real issue. But I kind of take a longer view of that. I think, you know, it goes up and it comes back. If the activity itself is socially valid enough, it will survive.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dave. We're going to go to Deborah here. And we're probably, you know, we've had quite a good chat and different, and we want different and diverse points of view around all our topics. But we'll probably move from the financial topic, having had a go on this, to some other things in a moment or two. But Deborah, we'll let you come in now, please, by all means.
I just wanted to give another point of view from Europe, because the situation that has just been described from Switzerland is a wonderful, healthy, almost paradise situation for music. And I grew up in London and grew up very much in that kind of an environment. I played in a youth orchestra as a cellist at the age of 10 and did all the Brahms and Tchaikovsky symphonies by the time I was 16, and so on and so on. But for the last 30 years, I've lived in a place called Darkest Italy. And the scene is very different. Italy suffers from a music scene that is either the brass band or the choral society, which are actually very depleted in terms of musical experience, or the purely formal conservatory professional training. And there is really very, very little in between. So, yeah, community music. I run now a community music project in the area where I live, which is in Tuscany. It's not in the darkest part of darkest Italy. But nonetheless, there is a huge need for people to be able to come together in spaces that have instruments and facilities and heating in the winter and a kitchen to make coffee in, and to be able to work in their community music with facilitators who listen carefully to what they want and can put their professional competence at the, you know, to the uses of the community. So, you know, the situations are different. And I guess, to a certain extent, yes, it could be that we're reinventing the wheel. I'm also now a professionally trained music therapist, and that's where I spend most of my time professionally working. And of course, music therapy, we think that it's all started in the last 60, 70 years, but in fact, music therapy's been around, well, the Australian people and the Aboriginal people particularly know about it. They were perhaps the first music therapists, and have always maintained that tradition. So, you know, it's a lot to do with just words as well, because music is simpler than we think it is, I guess.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask the panel to come in, and there was kind of two areas, but the one I think, the only one I may have time to focus on, folks, is going back to this thing that you mentioned, Bridie, but also Sui Bang mentioned this a lot, and it's part of all your work, I think, which is community music and broader agendas. So go and be extra musical stuff. Some of the, you know, working with some of the particular populations that you were talking about, and some of the very engaged things that were happening, and the kind of results and outcomes of that. I'd quite like to hear somebody coming in on that, and what that means for you, and how that might be changing in the 21st century. Would anybody like to come in on that briefly here? Bridie, I'm going to turn to you if that's okay. Talk about community music and engaged. Yeah. Broader agendas.
In terms of broader agendas, there's lots that we could say, and there's panellists here who could share many stories. And I've just come off the back of intense discussions about a big community engagement project we've just been doing with Aboriginal communities, and there's a raft of broader agendas in that. And to my great joy, it was described as a very sophisticated level of engagement, and my colleague Howell, who's on that project, is here. And I think the reason for that is because everything that we did was very contextually specific. It wasn't like we had a particular way of working that we went in as the interventionist and did our thing, and everybody else followed and came out playing the brass band magically, or the samba band, or whatever it might be. It's this process of going into these contexts, whether it's about human rights or whether it's about the environment or whatever, and just being and slowing down, and to use an Aboriginal way of working, sit down, connect with the ground that you're working on, and just listen and be sensitive to what's happening before you think about how you're going to be responding. And I think that is just the key, because we can't stand here with some blanket magical list of rules that that you follow when you go into a post-conflict zone, or when you go into a nuclear waste dump, or whatever it might be to engage in a project. But it's that process of really being sensitive to context and the people who you're working with, because if it, in this intercultural way, certain things are going to work in some contexts and not in others. So it's just that deep sensitivity to where you are. And if I think of some of the great facilitators, like my colleagues I'm looking at here, they do that. It's that, and then adapting their practice to whatever situation they might find themselves. And I think that is really something that I've found is just crucial. Otherwise, it's just going to fall flat and not work.
Thank you. So that wonderful resonant phrase that you said, a deep sensitivity to where you are. And I know, Swee-Beng, you're working in a very small geographical area in a city, but in very different cultural contexts. I wonder, would you like to say a little more about that? Would that be okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in our case, even though we work in a very small geographical area, there are many traditions there, and at the same time, the government promotes a certain type of culture or tradition and not the others, so the others are all marginalized. So how do we handle this situation? How do we be more inclusive? What do we include? Do we change traditions so that the younger generation can appreciate? Do we adapt to modernization or what? So these are all very important questions that we have to deal with when we work with children or with communities. But I think in the end, it is the communities who have the answers, not really us. So we just have to facilitate and see what they want.
I'm going to open it up again to the group out here, and staying with this idea of community music and broader agendas, but also around those type of processes, of very contextualized processes, and welcome contributions or further questions. We're not trying to find answers, we're trying to find further questions. Wants to pick that one? It would be cool to go. It might be something to do with the process. I might turn back to Dave, if I may, because I know you have looked at community. You've come from community music process. But you've had a long journey, and your journey has been informed, if I don't want to go too far, but by those processes and your ability to step back and see them in other contexts also.
Well, yeah, I think what the link to the issue of remuneration, one of the challenges that I think anybody who's doing this work has is why you're doing it. Now, that would apply as much to someone who's working, like our colleagues said here, in a thing that perhaps might need facilitation, or might need a different kind of facilitation, as much as it is to someone who wants to bring down the government. So you've got to have your own form of philosophical approach to the work. And one of the downsides of what happened in the UK, I think a while back, I'm going back now, what was referred to as the glory days, when there was tons of money swirling around, is that a lot of people did come into the work for no other reason than the money. Well, yeah, they did. And the question there wasn't, I was often seen as the person who was, about the political importance of this work. But what I've seen for myself is that in my own path, I've taken those practices now into formal education. And my reason for doing that was because I was seeing lots of young people who were having a very poor musical experience in school, and it seemed to me to be just as important that they could get better kind of facilitation. So for me, there was still a political objective to what I was trying to do, but it didn't mean that it stayed within the community. And I think that's one of the fantastic things about community music, is that the practices and processes are transferable, as long as you remember why you're doing it.
And what are those practices? What transfers? What can you take? Yeah.
Well, it's been fascinating because much of the last 10 years of the work that I've been doing has been about trying to gently coax people who are working as music teachers in schools and have had a preparation which doesn't enable them to let go of the control. And that's one of the the defining characteristics is about
Those are
actually
nodding up here, yeah.
not being in control and being able to respond to people's needs. You know, in the very first ISME conference that I presented, I talked about the community musician as being the kind of musical equivalent of the Swiss Army penknife, you know. It's a very complex package of skills that you've got, and knowing which to apply in which situation is really important. And sadly, the kind of musicians that Gillian was talking about earlier, who've perhaps come through a much more tightly corralled training, I often feel, you know, would have benefited from those kinds of techniques, whether they were going to work in community context or not.
Very clear. Absolutely, absolutely, sir.
David, I experience poor practice. Sometimes I'm in the midst of it quite a lot. And recently, a few months ago, without mentioning names and being detailed about it, I think I shared with my colleagues, you know, over the days. I witnessed someone coming from a very moneyed, you know, source, the umbrella, you know, group, the organization under the auspices of which he was working, has got all the answers in terms of, you know, ticking the financial boxes. But the quality of the work was very poor. And I'm not just talking like, oh, maybe like a musician who's blowing out a tune, or, you know, just, you know, blow some warm air into it and what have you, or I haven't practiced. It lacked what Bridie is talking about, and that's why I've been whooping and getting excited, because it lacked sensitivity to the culture. And it doesn't matter whether you're working in Northern Ireland or, you know, Rwanda or South Africa or here. For me, or in my kitchen or in the prison, for me there's a universal quality that just goes right through. I do not change, you know, sorry to over-personalize it, but I'm talking about my practice. And I judge these people to have been very poor, and it was very upsetting and frustrating. So yes, you can have the money and what have you, but the most important thing is to have that sensitivity and that awareness, that deep human vibration, you know. If you don't have that, then you know, you've got to go through the practice.
We haven't got a huge amount of time left. We're not going to get... Oh, I'm sorry. We have enough time, certainly, for yourself. Please, absolutely.
Lee, I'm from New Zealand. I work in a professional organisation, an orchestra, but I actually perform myself in community groups. And I feel like I can see something that's happening in New Zealand in the last sort of maybe 5 or 10 years. And that is this sort of, you think of, I don't know what to call it, continuum, I suppose, a line between community music and amateur groups and professional groups. And what seems to be happening is that a lot of groups are actually, you know, through their own, I suppose, they're getting really passionate about what they're doing in community music, and they're getting really aspirational about it. I mean, I'm very involved in the brass banding scene, which is getting very strong in New Zealand, as well as choirs. And what's happening is organisations and communities are getting further down the continuum because they have aspirations, artistic aspirations. And how they're sort of approaching the other end is, I feel like they're putting brakes on at a certain point, and they're saying, we don't want to be paid because that would put too much pressure on us, and we're not going to enter that zone. But what we'd like is we'd like to have some kind of leadership within, you know, what we're doing in order for us to aspire as much as we possibly can to be, you know, to achieve, well, hopefully as close as we can get to the professional end. And what the communities are doing in brass banding and choirs, and I wonder if we can relate to the festival that I was talking about, is that members themselves are finding ways to fund the leader within that. So there's only one person being paid, and that's the leader, and it's being funded by the community. And they're bringing somebody in because they want to aspire. And it's causing quite the tension in Auckland, particularly, I suppose, in the orchestras, and that performance levels of some of the community groups is actually extremely good. And they're presenting things for free to the community, and then, you know, other groups that are professional are charging $90. And that's actually, it's a really interesting thing in Auckland at the moment. And it's getting to the point about booking venues and things like this. You know, community groups are booking professional venues now, and it's really interesting. And I'm not sure where it's going to end up, but I can see this continuum is actually becoming quite flexible in terms of, you know,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn to the panel just a little bit on that other topic. Just a couple of minutes, and we haven't really talked about it. And I've come here, and Eugene's come here from the other side of the world, yeah? And there's a number of us in the room who are not from this area. And yet, when we come to this region, there's something different, yeah? There's something different in it, and there's something different in the community music. So I'd quite like to hear what is the difference, what's special around this side of the world in terms of community music activity. And I'm probably going to go to Jennifer on that one. I'm going to go, yes, I just saw them. The eyes were going like this, and they were all going, good here. Jennifer on that. And yeah, please.
I don't really have much to compare it with, to be honest. But what I did notice in the conference that I've recently been part of was the incredible collegiality in the group. So it's a spirit of sharing, being very open with knowledge and ideas and that kind of thing, which I haven't experienced in any other group. So it's a real testament to, I think, the kinds of people that get involved in this work, and I'm sure that this is something that you can all relate to as well. So yeah, I might leave it there.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Gillian, you're going to tell us something.
Yeah, I think that I think about the larger region, because I think Australia is influenced by its Anglo-Saxon and European population in terms of the kind of community music we've been talking about mostly today. But within the wider Pacific region, I think it highlights for me that the term community music probably is a very Western term, that other cultures don't necessarily distinguish between professional music or commercial music and then community music. In fact, it's just music. A country that I have some experience of, and I see my colleague Ros Dunlop sitting there, she has a huge amount of experience in, is Timor-Leste, or East Timor. And I think in East Timor we see music looking quite different, and music performance is often very connected to culture, to religion, and to connection to traditions and family and the larger family groups or clans or the communities that people live within and are committed to in a collective form. We also see the way that colonialisation and also occupation or conflict can decimate those musical traditions, but also can undermine them. And make it very difficult for those who are the culture bearers to pass on those traditions, either through fear of punishment because the music is seen as a form of resistance to the ruling power, or because the undermining process that can take place as part of the colonisation of a country can often suggest that this knowledge is primitive, is not very valuable, is a poor substitute for more higher forms of music. So I think that when we think about community music in this region, we need to be really casting wide the way we think about music activity and community participation in music, and that the barriers that may be faced may be different to those I'm aware of in my context, where some of the barriers are about people's sense that they're not musical enough, or they don't know how to sing in tune, or they never learned an instrument at school and haven't had access to that. The sorts of barriers that can be in place in another community within our region can be very, very different, and maybe much more about the relationship for a person to their culture and to the collective, and then to the wider powers within that space.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do is just have a closing comment from everybody on the panel around this topic of community music in the 21st century. Short closing comment, and I'll wrap up what for me has been a very thought-provoking session. Thank you very much for your contributions also. We're going to start with you, Eugene, and we'll just go down the table if that's okay.
Yeah, maybe the only thing I'd like to mention is that I'm enjoying currently, I'm enjoying the notion of community in the 21st century, going beyond the physical, immediate community. Like, I'm in touch with communities all over the planet through online networks that I use in my work, and for me that's the latest exciting.
Thank you very much.
I'm starting to think very much about the role of facilitators within communities, and especially from an institutional perspective, and the role that we have, and the role of community engagement in our learning and teaching practices, and I think that that's something very much worth considering and taking further.
Right. Thank you.
At the conference, people talked about a concept Australian Indigenous scholar Martin Nakata talks about common ground. And people were talking about the common ground that we felt amongst all of our projects. And I said, yeah, but he also talks about another really interesting concept that I think is even more useful for us. And that's about a cultural interface and the tensions that are inherent when things rub up against each other. And when I was talking about the diversity of practices that I think now characterise 21st century music, and the way that we've had some arguments and tears, I think those points where there's that tension and that rubbing and that buffering up against each other in terms of practices and processes is actually a really healthy thing. I think that's where we really see some exciting developments in the field, as opposed to us all sort of working from a point of common ground, which has possibly characterised the field in years.
Thank you very, very much, please.
I'm thinking a lot about ownership of music and of processes, and individuals' ownership as well as collective ownership, autonomy, and the blurring of lines. I think that we're seeing a lot this century of the blurring of boundaries between things that were once may have been seen as distinct are now often overlapping. And I think technology and globalisation has a lot to do with that. It's something to be excited by. It's also something to be aware of, because it can also work in ways that we don't necessarily like.
Thank you very much, Joanne.
I think I learned a lot from this conference regarding different types of communities, especially communities who have the freedom to play music and to promote their own music. Whereas in, I think, the country that I come from, there are many social problems. There's religion, there's conflict. There are government policies that prevent communities from coming together even sometimes, because the music is censored and they are not allowed to play because they're praying to, because the music is related to religion and to rituals. So in an Islamic country, Islamic state, the state might not allow that. So I think for me it was, the idea of community is very different here. In Western countries than in my own country, and I learned a lot about different types of communities. Yeah.
Okay. Folks, thank you. That's been a diverse session. It's been stimulating. You've contributed well, but I think you mostly need to thank the panel here, because they've really blown our minds. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't want to hijack this, but a quick plea. If any of you are from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and are interested in forming some sort of network among people interested in community music making, perhaps if you could come down to the front now and see me, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic. Nice job.
Oh, thank you. I didn't think it was, but that's very nice to hear. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was as inspiring as the previous session.